I wasn't invited to my own son's birthday party. Not really. The envelope had my name on it, sure, but it was addressed to Eleanor Caldwell and guests, with a decorative insert featuring glossy shots of Max posed in front of a vintage convertible on Eleanor's estate. Tuxedo. Polished smile. 18 candles waiting to be blown out, none of them mine to light. The first time I read the invitation, I laughed, the kind of laugh that sounds almost like choking. Then I reread it, because surely I was misreading things. I wasn't. Max's birthday was being thrown by Eleanor. Again, only this time she wasn't even pretending to include me. The event was to be held at the Caldwell estate, the same place where I once sat nervously at the dinner table, praying the silverware wouldn't betray my hands. Eleanor's favorite game was watching me try to guess which fork was meant for which course. Back then, I was still Gregory's wife, still Max's full-time mother, still hopeful that I might someday be accepted. I should have known better. I placed the invitation on the counter, staring at the gold-embossed lettering until it blurred. Max's smile beamed at me from that thick cardstock like he was posing for someone else, someone he wanted to impress. Someone who wasn't me? I reached for my phone. Texted. "Hey sweetheart, got the invite. I'd love to see you that weekend. Maybe breakfast before the party?" No reply. I stared at the empty message bubble so long, the screen dimmed. I tapped again, left another message. Lighter. Cheerful. Or coffee? Whatever works for you. Just want to hug my boy. Still nothing. That's how it's been lately. Eleanor calls, he answers. She offers tennis lessons, private SAT tutors, and trust fund whispers. I offer casseroles and long walks and unconditional love. Guess which one a 17-year-old boy gravitates toward. But this party exclusion, it was a new low. I poured myself a glass of wine. It was noon. I didn't care. The house was too quiet anyway, too clean. Too full of reminders that he used to be here. Legos in the carpet, half-eaten cereal bowls, sneakers kicked off mid-run. Now all I had were echoing floors and a teenage ghost I still called my son. I picked up the invitation again. Read every line like it was a verdict. Formal attire. Valet provided. Eleanor Caldwell cordially invites. No mention of me, not even a line for, hosted by Max's parents. Just her. She'd erased me. Paper and ink and silence. That's all it took. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where Max used to do his homework while I graded papers beside him. The same one where he once told me he wanted to be an astronaut, then a chef, then a video game designer, depending on the week. I looked at the wine in my glass, then at the invitation, then back at the phone. Still no reply. I wasn't going, not this time, but I wasn't giving up either. Eleanor might have stolen his party, she might have bought his silence for now, but I was still his mother, and I was done playing nice. The first time Eleanor called me a charity case, we were standing in her garden, right next to a row of blood-red roses she'd paid a florist to arrange and tend year-round. It was the week after Gregory and I got engaged, and she was sipping iced tea with a crystal stirrer, her pearls catching the sun like tiny teeth. "You seem earnest," she'd said, eyes scanning my sundress like it offended her. "But let's not pretend this isn't what it is. Gregory has a soft heart. He always took in strays." I smiled like I hadn't heard her. Because back then, I thought love could fix it. That if I just proved myself. Baked the right scones, nodded politely at the right fundraisers, praised the right overpriced lawn sculptures, she'd warm up. That she'd eventually see me not as a mistake, but as family. It never happened. Even our wedding felt like a truce she was negotiating under duress. She wore black, real black, not navy. And she gave a toast that began with, "Well, when Gregory decides something, there's no changing his mind," and ended with, "To the bride, may you grow into the role." The role. As if being his wife was a performance I'd been miscast in. Still, I played the part. I moved into their world, the fundraisers, the charities, the dinners with people who'd never worked a 9 to 5 in their lives. I smiled, I poured wine, I listened to the right gossip, laughed in the right places, and when Max was born, I thought maybe everything would shift. He had my nose, Gregory's jaw, and Eleanor's eyes, that piercing Caldwell steel. I thought holding him in that hospital room would unite us. That she'd look at him and see me, see us, and let go of whatever it was she held against me. But she didn't. She showed up with a monogrammed baby blanket and a photographer. She handed Max to the woman she brought with her, our family's preferred infant nurse, and then spent 20 minutes rearranging the bassinet for the perfect photo. Later, when I asked Gregory why she didn't want to hold him, he just shrugged. She's formal. That's how she shows love. Love? That wasn't love, that was ownership. And that's how it was year after year. She offered help, always with a string. Suggested nannies, tutors, wardrobe stylists, all of whom reported back to her. Every parenting decision I made became an argument cloaked in concern. Max needed structure. He needed exposure to the right people. He needed to be shaped. And Gregory? He didn't want to take sides. He'd retreat to his office, to his golf club, to his business trips. He'd pat my hand and say things like, "It's just how she is. Don't let it get to you." But it did get to me. It got into everything. Into the way I second-guessed myself every time Max cried. Into the way I looked at report cards, wondering if his B in math was my fault. Into the way I looked at myself in mirrors, trying to find the flaw she always saw. I gave up everything for that marriage. For Max. I quit the job I loved. Teaching middle school English. Because Eleanor said it was unbecoming for a Caldwell wife to work. I hosted parties. I learned to cook veal. I memorized the names of men I didn't respect and their overpriced wives. And it was never enough. Eventually, the distance between Gregory and me became a canyon. He stopped looking at me, and I stopped trying to be seen. By the end, we weren't even fighting, we were just quiet. When we divorced, Eleanor didn't hide her relief, she didn't even send a message, just had her lawyer call mine to ensure Max's schedule wasn't disrupted. But even then, I had hope. I thought Max would see. That the bond we had, the bedtime stories, the inside jokes, the Sunday pancakes, would hold. Now I'm starting to wonder if all those memories are mine alone. After the divorce, I made a promise to myself, no matter what happened, no matter how cold Gregory got or how calculated Eleanor became, I would not lose Max. I wrote it down on a sticky note and kept it in my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license. It simply said, "Stay close, stay warm. Be the anchor." I read it when the house felt too quiet, when Max stopped returning my texts, when I sat in the stands at his soccer games and he barely waved. Max was my boy, my wild-haired, paint-splattered, dinosaur-obsessed little boy. He used to sleep with one hand wrapped around my pinky and whisper secrets into my ear like I was the only one who'd understand. Monsters in the closet, crushes in kindergarten, dreams of space, all of it he gave to me, no one else. So I saved. Every spare dollar I had from my teaching job, every tutoring gig I'd picked up after school, every birthday check from my mother that I didn't spend, I put it away. Quietly. Carefully. Relentlessly. I opened a separate account, one Eleanor couldn't touch, couldn't trace. I called it the Max Fund. I didn't tell anyone about it, not Gregory, not even my closest friends. At first, it was just a dream, a little safety net, in case Max needed something Eleanor's estate wouldn't cover. A used car, maybe. Art supplies, a deposit on a college dorm. But over the years, it grew, bit by bit. Compound interest, smart investments, side hustles. I clipped coupons. I skipped haircuts. I mended my shoes. By Max's 17th birthday, it had hit 125,000. That number, 125, became a kind of prayer. When he was cold to me, I'd whisper it under my breath. When he didn't come home on the weekends we agreed to, I'd look at that bank balance and repeat it like a lifeline. This was my gift to him, my proof. My armor against Eleanor's narrative that I was poor, that I was unstable, that I had nothing to offer. Maybe I didn't have a trust fund or a last name that opened doors, but I had love and discipline and sacrifice. And someday, I was going to sit across from Max and hand him that account information, not to win him, not to shame him, just to show him, I see you, I've always seen you. Even when you didn't look back. I imagined his face when I told him. Shock. Maybe tears. That same expression he used to wear when I showed up at school plays with a bouquet of his favorite orange daisies. I wanted him to know that every late night I spent grading essays, every evening I gave up to tutor calculus I barely remembered, every dollar I didn't spend on myself, it was all for him. Not for revenge. Not even to outmatch Eleanor. Just to be the mother he needed, even when he didn't know he needed me. The silence had a weight to it, heavier than anything I'd ever lifted. He used to call me after school just to tell me about his day. Now? Nothing. Days would pass, then weeks. A text here, a one-word answer there. I love you, Max. K. Eleanor was working her magic. Or poison. Maybe both. and I could feel the distance stretch like a taut wire ready to snap. The signs were subtle at first. Max stopped calling me Mom. Not outright, he just started using my name more. Julia, where's my jacket? Julia, can I borrow the car? It felt like a pebble in my shoe, small but relentless. Then came the missed dinners. Grandmother's having a family meeting. There's a function she wants me to attend. Function. Like he was a senator, not a high school senior. I told myself not to panic, not to push, that teenagers pull away, that it was normal. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about adolescence. It was Eleanor. Always Eleanor. She'd dangled the trust fund like candy, whispered things about legacy and prestige, called me emotionally delicate in front of him more than once. She always smiled when she said it, like it was a compliment. Max needs stability, Julia. You understand? I wanted to scream every time she used his name like a weapon. I started calling him more, texting more, sending him stupid memes he used to laugh at. Pictures of our old dog, Taco, who now lived with my neighbor because Eleanor said pets were unsanitary distractions. He didn't respond to most of it, and when he did, it was clipped. Guarded. Like he wasn't alone when he replied. Then came the voicemail. Hey Mom, he started, and my heart leapt. That word, finally. But then he kept talking. Grandmother says I should stay at the estate for a while. You've got a lot going on, and I just need some structure right now. Don't take it the wrong way. I love you. I just need space. Structure. That word again. That fucking word. I played the message 10 times, 100, until I could mimic every pause, every breath he took, until I could tell exactly when he was reading from a script. I went to Gregory. I shouldn't have, but I did. His condo smelled like cedar and indifference. He poured me scotch and didn't ask why I was crying. She's turning him against me, I said. He just shrugged. She's offering him opportunities, Julia. The kind we couldn't. She's offering control. He didn't answer that, just looked out the window like the conversation bored him. Do you really think he's better off with her? I asked. Gregory looked back at me. I think Max needs to be around people who expect excellence. That was the last time I went to him for help. From that moment on, I knew I was on my own. Again. Only this time, I wasn't going to wait around for another insult wrapped in a crystal glass. I wasn't going to let Eleanor rewrite who I was in Max's life. I was done playing defense. She wanted a war? Fine. She was going to get one. It started with the canceled weekend. We planned it for weeks. Movies, his favorite pancakes, a trip to that used bookstore downtown where he used to spend hours reading manga and pretending not to like poetry. I even cleaned out the guest room, made it into a teen zone, whatever that meant. Beanbags, snacks, Bluetooth speakers, the works. And then, the night before he was supposed to come over, I got the text. Can't make it this weekend. Grandmother has a gala. I'm helping with the planning. Planning. Max had never even RSVP'd to things before Eleanor got her claws back in. Now he was organizing fundraisers for causes he barely understood and spending weekends in tuxedos instead of sweatpants. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed and deleted my reply half a dozen times before finally settling on, "That's okay, maybe next week?" He didn't answer. I waited all weekend. I baked the pancakes anyway, kept them warm in the oven until the smell made me nauseous. I even drove by the estate once, like a ghost haunting her own life. From the road, I could see the valet stand, the string lights, Eleanor's guests laughing on the veranda like it was something out of a magazine spread. I didn't see Max. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. I went home and cried into his old hoodie. There was a darkness creeping in then. Not just sadness, but something colder. Something that said, this isn't just a phase. This is erasure. Eleanor wasn't waiting for him to turn 18 to take him. She was doing it now, and she was winning. I called him the next day. No answer. Left a message, then another. Hey Max. I just wanted to talk. About anything. About nothing. Just call me, okay? I miss you. The third message, I didn't even try to hide the hurt. You know what hurts the most? It's not that you didn't come. It's that you didn't even say you were sorry. Still nothing. I told myself I'd wait, give him space, let him come to me. But that night, I sat in his room, the real one, not the one with gold trim at Eleanor's, and stared at the empty bed, the worn-out posters still clinging to the walls. And that's when I knew. Something was wrong. Not just a mother-son rift. Not just growing pains. There was something darker afoot. something calculated. And I wasn't crazy for feeling it. I wasn't imagining the way he spoke in clipped tones now, like he'd been coached. I wasn't imagining the distance or the blank way he looked at me when he said he had other plans. Eleanor was doing more than spoiling him. She was rewriting him. I could feel it in my bones. That mother's intuition no amount of manipulation could dull. And if I didn't fight back soon, I was going to lose him completely. The envelope came on a Wednesday. No warning, no knock on the door. Just a thick, cream-colored envelope slipped through the mail slot like a snake under a door. From Caldwell and Myers, LLP. My hands trembled before I even opened it. Something in me already knew. That hum in your gut when the other shoe isn't just about to drop. It's mid-fall. I sat down at the kitchen table and slid it open with a butter knife. The letterhead alone made my stomach twist. Paragraphs of legalese, polished and detached, but the words that mattered weren't hard to find. Petition for emergency guardianship. I reread it twice. It didn't make sense. Max was 17, almost an adult. I was his mother. His legal guardian. No court had ever challenged that. There'd never been a report, a concern, a visit. I was a schoolteacher for God's sake. I spent my evenings grading essays and fighting sleep, not neglecting my child. But there it was, in black and white. Eleanor Caldwell was filing for emergency guardianship of Max Caldwell, citing me, Julia Ann Mitchell, as financially incapable and emotionally erratic. I laughed, or maybe sobbed. It was hard to tell the difference by then. Emotionally erratic? Because I cried when my son ignored me? Because I wanted him to come home? Financially incapable? Because I didn't have a live-in chef and trust fund lawyers at my beck and call? It was rich, it was vile, and it was perfectly her. There was a court date. 2 weeks away. I called Max, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Did you know about this?" No answer. I tried Gregory, hoping, foolishly, that some sliver of decency still lived under that tailored apathy he wore like cologne. He picked up on the third ring. "She's trying to take him," I said, skipping hello. A pause. I heard something about that. Julia, you knew?" "I didn't know the details. She said it was precautionary, that you've been—" "Say it," I snapped. "That I've been unstable? Is that what she told you?" He sighed. "Look, Eleanor's just trying to do what's best for Max." And there it was, the script, the one she fed everyone. I hung up without another word. Then I sat at the table, legal documents spread out in front of me, and felt the weight of every lonely night, every unanswered call, every lie whispered into Max's ear. She wasn't just trying to push me out. She was trying to erase me. But I wasn't going quietly. She picked the wrong mother to underestimate. I hadn't spoken to Claire Whitman in nearly 5 years. We'd drifted, the way people do after college. Separate cities, different priorities, the kind of slow silence that grows until you forget who stopped calling first. But when I saw her name on the community board at the grocery store, Claire Whitman, probate and family law specialist, something in me jolted, like fate nudging me by the elbow, whispering, "Look again." I took a picture of the flyer with my phone, stood there in the cereal aisle surrounded by boxes and blinking fluorescent lights, and just stared at her name. I remembered late-night ramen in our dorm room, the way she once stood up to a professor for me during a particularly cruel critique. Claire didn't flinch when things got hard, she never had. I called her that night. "Julia Mitchell," she said, her voice warm and steady. "Well, I'll be damned." We met for coffee the next morning. I brought the legal documents in a manila folder, my hands still shaking as I slid them across the table. She read them in silence, eyes scanning with the focus of someone who'd lived too long in the fine print. When she finished, she leaned back, her face unreadable. "She's going after your son," Claire said quietly, "with everything she's got." "I know. She's using financial instability as a wedge, emotional manipulation. And she's banking on the court's bias toward wealth." I nodded. "And she's winning." Claire tilted her head, a slow, deliberate motion. "Not if I have anything to say about it." We spent the next hour digging into the mess. I told her about the trust fund, the party I wasn't invited to, the voicemail from Max, the cold shoulder from Gregory. I told her about Eleanor, her calculated charm, the way she'd always smiled like she was holding a knife behind her back. Claire didn't interrupt, she just took notes. "I've dealt with women like her," she said finally. "They leave no fingerprints, but the damage is everywhere." I nodded. "She's rewriting who I am in his life. And he's starting to believe it." Claire tapped her pen against the table. Then we need to find something she didn't plan for. What do you mean? I mean leverage. She leaned in, lowered her voice. The Caldwell estate, there's something off about it. I handled a probate case a few years back that involved the same firm Eleanor's using now. Same kind of airtight control, same patterns. I remember thinking it was too clean. I frowned. Richard's will? Possibly. If she's this calculated, I wouldn't put it past her to have altered something. I felt my pulse quicken. I remembered the last conversation I'd had with Richard Caldwell before he passed. He'd taken my hand and told me to keep Max grounded. Said the money didn't matter as much as the man Max would become. She didn't like that I was close to him, I murmured. Claire raised an eyebrow. Then that's where we start. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Claire called me 2 days later, her voice crisp and tight. Meet me at the courthouse archives. Bring coffee. That was all she said. When I arrived, she was already there, hunched over a wooden table with a stack of files that looked like they hadn't seen daylight in years. She didn't look up as I approached, just held out her hand for the coffee and said, "You're going to want to sit down." I did. She pushed a file across to me. Inside was a copy of Richard Caldwell's will, the original, the one filed right after his death. "And this," she said, tapping another folder, "is the codicil Eleanor submitted 6 months later." Supposedly clarifying Richard's intentions, except that clarification gave her total control of the family trust. I stared at the documents. The signatures looked the same at first glance, but there was something off. Richard's name was written with an extra loop in one version, a flourish. I remembered because I'd seen him sign birthday cards with it. "She forged this," I said softly. Claire nodded. "That's what it looks like." She slid over a report from a handwriting analyst. "I pulled a few samples from your old anniversary card, his checks, even that letter he wrote to Max when he turned 10. The loops, the angle of the capital R, they're consistent. Except here, in the codicil. It's more rigid, like someone was trying to mimic it instead of writing naturally." I stared down at the forged page, bile rising in my throat. Eleanor hadn't just manipulated, she'd committed fraud. And she'd done it with surgical precision. "Can we prove this?" I asked. "We're getting close," Claire said, "but we'll need more, something personal. Something only Richard could have written. A note, a letter, anything that contradicts the codicil." I closed my eyes, trying to remember every moment I'd spent with him near the end. The hospice visits, the quiet afternoons when I'd read to him because no one else bothered to come. He'd told me things, then. Half coherent maybe, but real. He'd hated how Eleanor handled money. He said he wanted something different for Max. And then it hit me. "There was a journal," I whispered. "He gave me a journal." Said it was full of useless ramblings, but he didn't want Eleanor finding it. Claire's eyes lit up. "Where is it?" I think it's still in the attic. I haven't opened that box since I moved." She stood, already gathering her things. "Go, find it. If it's what I think it is, Julia, this could be the thread that unravels her entire web." I left the courthouse shaking, but not from fear. From the first real surge of power I'd felt in years. The box was buried beneath old blankets and forgotten coats, shoved in the darkest corner of the attic where I'd left it after the move, thinking I'd deal with it later. Dust coated the lid like time itself had tried to bury what was inside. But my hands knew exactly what they were looking for. The journal wasn't fancy, just worn leather, the spine cracked and soft with age. I opened it slowly, half expecting the pages to crumble. They didn't. His handwriting was still there. Sharp, impatient strokes like he was always running out of time. I read the first line out loud. "If anyone ever finds this, no, I did not go quietly." I sank to the floor right there among the insulation and shadows and read every page. It was all there. Notes about Eleanor's spending, her obsession with image, the way she manipulated the board of the Caldwell Foundation to funnel money into her pet projects. But more than that, it was personal. Richard had doubts. He wrote about regret, about raising Gregory to be passive, about watching Max become a trophy in a house of mirrors. "I don't want Eleanor raising that boy in my name," he wrote on one page. "If I'm gone before I can fix it, someone else has to. Julia sees him. She sees through the polish. She's the only one who might keep him human." I wiped at my face with the sleeve of my sweater. And then I found the torn page. Half of it still clung to the binding, the edges jagged. But the top line was enough. I hereby establish a scholarship fund in Max Caldwell's name, managed by, and then it stopped. I sat with the journal in my lap, heart pounding. Claire had said the codicil granted Eleanor full control of all educational funds. But that line, that unfinished declaration, proved Richard had other intentions. Maybe he didn't finish it. Maybe she found it before he could, but he'd written it, in his own hand. And now I had it. I brought the journal to Claire that night. She read it cover to cover in silence, then turned to me with a look I hadn't seen on her face before. "This isn't just useful," she said. "It's devastating. This isn't some petty squabble, Julia. This is fraud. Legacy theft. And we can prove it started before he died." She flipped back to the torn page. "We'll get a forensic analyst on this. If the language in the codicil matches this entry, we've got our smoking gun." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The man I'd quietly cared for in his final months, the man Eleanor called a shell, had left me the very tool to destroy her. He didn't go quietly, and neither would I. Claire moved quickly after that. Within days, she had a forensic analyst examining the handwriting, matching sentence fragments from the journal to the language in the codicil. The results were damning. Eleanor hadn't just mimicked Richard's voice. She'd lifted entire phrases, word for word, and twisted them into a document that gave her absolute power. I could barely breathe when Claire called to confirm it. She didn't even try to be subtle, she said. She just ripped his words straight out of his journal and used them to rewrite his legacy. The rage that flared in me then wasn't hot. It was cold, clean, focused. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, "What do we do next?" "We bring in the probate investigator," Claire said, "and Julia, this won't stay quiet." I was ready for that. What I wasn't ready for was the knock at my door the night after we filed the complaint. Gregory stood on my porch looking like a man who'd just learned the ground beneath him was made of glass. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, I just stepped aside. He walked into the house like it hurt him to be there, like the air was heavier than he remembered. He stood in the middle of the living room and stared at the photos on the wall. Max as a toddler, Max in his Halloween pirate costume, Max holding up a B+ in math like it was a gold medal. "I heard about the complaint," he said finally. "About my mother." I crossed my arms. "And?" "I saw the journal. Claire let me read parts of it. I didn't expect that." Claire must have known, must have thought he needed to see it for himself. I wasn't sure if I was grateful or furious. Gregory rubbed his face with both hands like he could scrub the shame off his skin. "I always suspected something," he said. "But I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to confront her." "She forged his will, Gregory. She stole from Max. She's been turning him against me for years." He nodded slowly. "I know, now I know." Silence stretched between us. "She told me you were unstable," he said quietly. "Said you were clinging. Emotional." I let her say those things. I let her convince me. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see the man I married. I saw the boy he'd always been. Afraid. Willing to let others steer the wheel so he didn't have to crash. "She used all of us," I said. "But she doesn't get to win." Gregory met my eyes. "I want to help, whatever you need." I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure I could trust that sudden turn of heart. But if Claire was right, if we were about to bring this to court, I would need every truth, every witness, every ounce of support I could find. Even if it came from a man who'd watched me drown for years before deciding to throw a rope. Gregory agreed to confront her. Not in some quiet, private setting, no soft landings. He said it had to be at the estate, in the house she ruled like a kingdom. I didn't ask why. Maybe he needed the theater of it. Maybe he just wanted her to feel exposed for once. He invited me to come, but I said no. I didn't trust myself not to scream. So he went alone. Claire and I waited in my living room, the air thick with nerves. The journal sat on the table between us like a loaded weapon. She sipped tea. I couldn't sit still. I paced, I folded laundry, I wiped down counters that didn't need wiping. When the text finally came from Gregory, it was simple. She admitted it. Not all of it, but enough. And then, 10 minutes later, another one. Max was there. My knees nearly gave out. Claire read over my shoulder and grabbed her coat without a word. We were in her car before I realized I hadn't even changed out of my sweatpants. My hands trembled the whole way to the estate. We waited down the street, parked under the shadow of Eleanor's iron gates. Claire made a call to the probate investigator, voice firm and crisp. I just stared at the house, my son inside, imagining what he'd seen, what he'd heard. The front door opened. Max stepped out first. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older, too, like a kid who'd aged 10 years in a single hour. Gregory followed, his face pale and drawn. And then Eleanor, rigid, composed, but not quite whole. Something in her posture had cracked. I got out of the car as Max reached the end of the driveway. He looked up, met my eyes, and for a long second, neither of us moved. Then he walked toward me, slowly, cautiously, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed. When he got close, I saw it. That flicker of something behind his eyes. Not anger, not shame, just confusion, hurt, the kind you can't hide behind money or polite manners. She lied, he said, voice small. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't know. I know you didn't. He stood there, arms limp at his sides, and for a second I thought he'd turn back around. But then he leaned in, just slightly, his head resting against my shoulder, like he remembered, like he came home. The courtroom smelled like dust and polish and old, tired lies. I sat beside Claire, my hands folded tightly in my lap, watching Eleanor from across the aisle. She looked like she always did, pristine, poised, her hair shellacked into its usual helmet of steel gray. But there was something new around her eyes, a twitch she couldn't control, a tightness in her jaw every time the judge looked her way. She wasn't in control anymore. Claire had prepared everything, the journal, the handwriting analysis, the financial records, the original will. She'd even found a former Caldwell Foundation accountant willing to testify about Eleanor's charitable diversions. I had never seen her so composed, so lethal. Your Honor, she said during opening remarks, this is not simply a matter of guardianship. This is a case of fraud. A case of power and wealth used to isolate a mother from her child. A woman who forged a dying man's words to control a legacy that was never hers. Eleanor's lawyer objected, of course. Called it a character attack. But the judge allowed it. He'd read the files, he knew. They brought Max in after the morning recess. He walked in wearing a navy jacket that didn't quite fit and shoes too stiff for his usual stride. He looked around, spotted me, and gave the smallest nod. I nodded back, like we were tethered across the room by something invisible but real. They called me first. I told the court everything, the cold dinners, the canceled visits, the trust fund Eleanor dangled like bait, the text messages that stopped, the silence that grew until I couldn't hear my own son's voice anymore. I kept my voice calm, steady, but my heart slammed in my chest with every word. Then Claire presented the journal. She read Richard's entries aloud, her voice low and deliberate. If I'm gone before I can fix it, someone else has to. Julia sees him. She's the only one who might keep him human. The courtroom was silent. When they called Max to the stand, my breath caught in my throat. He shifted in his seat, fidgeted with his sleeve. He looked at Eleanor, then at me, and then he started to speak. At first, I thought grandmother was helping, he said. She gave me everything, tutors, money, clothes, all of it. But it felt cold, like it came with rules. And when I asked about my mom, she always changed the subject. His voice cracked just slightly. I thought Mom didn't care anymore, that she gave up. That's what I was told. But I was wrong. I see that now. He paused, looked down at his hands, then up at the judge. I want to live with my mom. Eleanor didn't flinch, not in front of the judge, not in front of Max. But I saw her hands. They were clenched so tightly the skin had gone white. The courtroom erupted after that. Motions, objections, arguments. But I didn't hear any of it. All I heard was Max's voice, over and over in my head. I want to live with my mom. The moment the judge banged the gavel and called for silence, I stopped breathing. It was time. Max was still on the stand, his face pale but steady, like he was holding a truth that was too big to carry alone, but too sacred to drop. The judge adjusted his glasses, looked down at his notes, then up again, eyes fixed on my son. You said you felt coached. Could you explain what you meant by that? Max swallowed hard. Grandmother? She'd talk to me before school, after meetings, whenever we were alone. Told me how to answer questions if someone ever asked about my mom. What to say if I wanted to seem mature. Controlled. And how did that make you feel? He hesitated. Just a moment. Then, softly, like I was playing a role, and I didn't know where the real me went, my heart cracked open. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the buzz of the overhead lights. Eleanor sat frozen beside her attorney, lips pressed into a thin, disbelieving line, like none of this was happening. The judge turned to Max again. "And what do you want now?" "I want to live with my mom," he said again, louder this time. "I want to go back to who I was, before all this." I covered my mouth. Claire reached over and squeezed my hand. Max was excused from the stand, and as he stepped down, he looked at me, not as if asking for permission or forgiveness, just acknowledgement. And I gave it, eyes locked to his, a silent message flowing between us. "You're home. I've got you." The judge called for a brief recess. Eleanor didn't look at me, not once. She just stared straight ahead like if she didn't acknowledge the crumbling, it wasn't real. Claire turned to me, voice low but firm. He broke the illusion. No matter what she tries to say next, that's the truth the court will remember. I nodded, still too stunned to speak. When the judge returned, his decision was swift. The codicil was suspended pending full investigation. Temporary guardianship was granted, to me. Eleanor's attorney argued, of course, tried to claim emotional instability. Claire produced phone records, bank statements, school reports, all solid, all clean. Then the judge said it. Ms. Caldwell's conduct, as presented, shows a troubling pattern of manipulation and control. Until the legitimacy of the amended will can be verified, all control over the trust and custody arrangements is hereby revoked. Custody is awarded to the biological mother, Julia Mitchell. The words landed like thunder in my chest. Eleanor didn't speak, she didn't even flinch. But her attorney did, whispered something, and she rose stiffly, like royalty dethroned, and walked out without looking back. Max rushed to me. I wrapped my arms around him, felt the full weight of his 17 years collapse into my embrace. Not the trust fund version, not the rehearsed air, just my son, my Max. And he whispered, "I'm sorry." I held him tighter. "Don't be, you're home." The fallout came fast. By the time we left the courthouse, Eleanor's world had already begun to fray. The media caught wind before we even made it to the parking lot, a local reporter with a mic and too many questions shouting something about forged documents and misappropriated funds. Claire whisked us away in her car before it could turn into a spectacle, but I saw it in Eleanor's face as she stepped into her town car behind us. The mask had slipped. That night, the headlines started. Socialite. Eleanor Caldwell under investigation for will forgery. Caldwell family trust in turmoil amid custody battle. Judge sides with mother after teen breaks silence in court. She must have been watching too, because the next morning, the Caldwell Foundation released a statement distancing itself from any personal matters involving its founder's widow. Her face, once a fixture at every ribbon cutting and gala, was quietly erased from the website by noon. By the end of the week, 3 charities had pulled funding. Gregory came by the house again, not in a suit this time, just jeans, a flannel, and a look that reminded me of the man I met before. Eleanor turned him into something polished and dull. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a folder. "More documents," he said. "Stuff from the estate. Claire might want to see them." I took the folder but didn't invite him in. "Not yet." He nodded like he expected that. "I'm sorry," he said after a long pause, "for letting her get so far." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The apology wasn't mine to carry. Inside, Max was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a sketch pad. He'd started drawing again. Not dark things, not abstract chaos, but people, small moments, a boy and his mother eating pancakes, a dog with one floppy ear, a woman sitting under a tree, eyes closed, smiling like she finally remembered how. He looked up when I came in and smiled. Not that tight, polite smile Eleanor trained him to wear, a real one. "I'm thinking of applying to the art program," he said. I sat beside him and ran my fingers through his hair. "You should, you're good." He leaned his head against my shoulder. "It feels like I'm finally breathing again." And that was it. The money, the estate, the courtroom victories, they all mattered, sure. But nothing compared to that moment. My son, safe in my home, choosing me. And her, alone in a mansion that couldn't love her back. Gregory returned 2 weeks later, not with papers this time, but with something heavier in his hands. A checkbook. He sat at my kitchen table like a man finally stepping out of someone else's shadow. I spoke with the board, he said quietly. I've stepped down, temporarily, until the investigation clears. I poured 2 cups of coffee, not out of politeness but habit. He accepted it with a nod, eyes on the checkbook like it might bite him. I'm giving you access to Max's education fund, what's left of it. And if Claire's right about the codicil being invalid, you'll get the rest. Legally. I waited. He looked up. But I'm giving it to you now because you already earned it. The words were strange coming from him, heavy with guilt maybe, but honest. He reached into his coat and handed me another envelope. Max's acceptance to a therapeutic boarding school just outside Santa Fe. Art-focused, small class sizes, counselors on site. Max's name at the top, bold and certain. He told me about it, Gregory said. Said he wants to go, said it feels like something for him, not for us. I opened the brochure, studied the campus. Trees. Skylit studios. A dorm that looked more like a quiet house than a facility. He's scared, I said. He's trying. I nodded. We enrolled him that same week. I let him pick out new art supplies, his own bedding, even the color of his luggage. Coral red. Bold. Unapologetic. At the airport, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. I'll call every Sunday, he said. You better. As he walked toward the gate, he turned back once, waving. That old dimple peeked through for just a second. Then he was gone. When I got home, I walked into his room and just stood there. Everything felt still. Not empty, just paused, like our life was finally catching its breath. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I picked up his sketchpad. On the last page was a drawing of me. Sitting on our porch, legs crossed, coffee mug in hand, the sun behind my head like a halo. He'd titled it, Home. The new house was nothing like the estate. No manicured lawns, no iron gates, no marble floors. Just a modest craftsman on a quiet street, where the wind carried the smell of lavender from a neighbor's garden, and the mailman still waved when he passed. Max came home for breaks, and every time he did, the house felt fuller, like it was remembering what it was built for. He'd changed, not all at once, slowly, thoughtfully. He didn't flinch when the phone buzzed anymore. He stopped calling me Julia. It was Mom again. Hesitant at first, then easy, natural, like the word had always belonged to me. We painted his room together over spring break, pale green. He picked it. This place feels real, he said, brush in hand, speckled with paint. Not like I have to be someone in it. I smiled. You never did. He looked over at me then, eyes clearer than I'd seen in years. I know that now. We went grocery shopping the next day, and he insisted on picking out the cereal. No more flax clusters, he said, wrinkling his nose. I'm free now. He laughed when he said it, but I could feel the truth underneath. He was free. The nightmares came less often. When they did, he'd knock on my door, stand there in silence until I moved aside and let him in. He didn't always want to talk. Sometimes he just needed to sit near someone who didn't demand anything. He started therapy again, too. Real therapy. He even invited me once. We sat in folding chairs while he talked about how lonely it had been, how he hadn't realized how deep it went until he came back up for air. I thought I had to choose between love and respect, he said. Turns out, I was just scared of losing both. I held his hand. You never lost me. He nodded, eyes glassy. Yeah, I know. Later that week, we made pancakes together. The same recipe from the old days. He flipped them too early, burned the edges. I didn't care. The kitchen was filled with music and flour and something that felt like a life we were allowed to keep. Something permanent, something healing. I didn't tell him I was going. I drove up the long gravel path of the estate one last time, past the gates that no longer felt like they belonged to me, through the garden she'd once weaponized with roses and silence. The house loomed like a monument to control. Beautiful, empty, irrelevant now. Eleanor answered the door herself. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not in stature. In presence. Her eyes were rimmed in shadow, her mouth drawn tight like she was bracing for war. Julia, she said, voice brittle. Come to gloat? I didn't answer. Just reached into my bag and pulled out the old photo. Max, age 10, missing a tooth, covered in paint from some project he'd refused to explain. The smile on his face was pure chaos and joy. I handed it to her. She stared at it for a long time. Her hand trembled. He was never yours, I said quietly. He's not your legacy, he's my son. Eleanor didn't speak. Maybe she couldn't. I turned to leave. But before I reached the door, I stopped. Just long enough to let the weight of my words settle in the silence between us. I hope someday he forgives you, I said without turning around. But I won't be asking him to. And then I walked out. Down the steps, through the roses, back to my car, back to the life I'd fought for, not the life she tried to design for him, but the one he'd chosen, with me. The scholarship ceremony was small, just a folding table draped in navy cloth, a few chairs scattered across the community center's garden, and a brass plaque that read, "The Richard Caldwell Memorial Scholarship, for art, integrity, and quiet bravery." Max stood beside me, taller now, dressed in his favorite worn sneakers and a button-down he barely bothered to iron. He didn't need to look perfect anymore, he just needed to be himself. When they called his name to speak, he hesitated, then stepped forward with the same careful confidence he'd been building all year. "My grandfather wanted this scholarship for kids who didn't fit into boxes," he said. "Who saw the world differently. I think he knew people like that didn't always survive in families like ours, unless someone fought for them." He looked at me, voice steady. "My mom fought." There was a pause. The kind that lands heavy. Then quiet applause. Not polite, not performative, real, raw. Later that evening, we cooked dinner together, just the two of us, no guests, no linen napkins or catered menus. Just pasta, garlic bread, and laughter echoing through our modest little kitchen. I watched him sprinkle Parmesan like it was a final flourish on a masterpiece. He was smiling, not for show, not for approval, just because he could. The photo on the counter caught the last of the golden hour light. The one we took the week he came home. Me, Max, the dog we finally adopted, all crammed into one frame, laughing too hard to look at the camera. Home. Not a place. Not a house. Not a last name. A bond. And this time, no one could take it from us.